Beaver Dick had wrote his own obituary in a letter to a friend. I am the son of Richard Leigh, formerly of the British Navy, and a grandson of James Leigh, formerly Colonel of the 16 Lancers, England. I was born January 9, 1831, in the city of Manchester, England. Came with my sister to Philadelphia, USA. Went for the Mexican War at close of 49, then came to the Rocky Mountains, and here I die. Before Yellowstone had a park boundary and before the Snake River country was carved into ranches and towns, a red-haired English immigrant was packing beaver traps into the Tetons and building a life between cultures. They called him Incapumba, the redhead, and to the frontier he became known as Richard Beaver Dick Leigh. Soldier in the Mexican War, trapper in the fading days of the fur trade, guide to men like Nathaniel Langford and Theodore Roosevelt, husband to a Shoshone woman memorialized today by Jenny Lake, his life reads like legend. But beneath the legend lies something far more complex. Conflicting dates, shifting accounts, diary entries written in rough spelling, and a devastating family tragedy that nearly erased him from the mountains he loved. In this episode, we're diving into the real story of Beaver Dick, separating memory from record and tracing the life of one of the last true figures to bridge the wild frontier in the settled West. Well, let's get into it, shall we? My name's Steven, and welcome to Wild West Deep Dives. Richard Leigh was born in Manchester, Lancaster, England on the 9th of January, 1831. According to Steve Roberts from Wyoming History, as a boy of about 7, he immigrated to America with his sister Martha, settling first in Philadelphia and later in Mount Hope, Pennsylvania. Roberts writes that Leigh left his sister and joined the Hudson's Bay Company, which sent him north into the trapping country of the Northwest, where, quote, his education as a trapper began. But Esther B. Allen, in History of Teton National Forest, presents a widely different path, stating that Leigh, quote, ran away from his home when he was 16 and went to sea, began a career in the British Navy, and later joined the Hudson's Bay Company, which brought him to the United States. But as y'all heard in the first part of this video, Leigh would write in his own journals he came over with his sister to Philadelphia, but then got the date wrong at what year the Mexican War ended. As you will learn, his memory at times may have failed him with remembering certain dates. Whether runaway sailor or simply a restless immigrant youth, the consistent thread is that by his mid-teens, he had committed himself to the fur trade world, a decision that separated him permanently from his sister, though Steve Roberts notes he later referred to his brother-in-law, Henry Wall, suggesting some continued correspondence. Leigh would serve in the Mexican-American War, and as the trend starts to form, it carries similar layers of interpretation. The Yellow Pine Times states that at only 17 years old, Leigh joined American forces and fought in the Mexican War. Allen, drawing directly from Leigh's own diary, quotes him as writing that he went for the Mexican War at the close of 48, attached to Company E, 1st Infantry. Roberts further claims he served under Lieutenant Colonel Henry Wilson and may have been present at the Siege of Veracruz, remaining stationed there through the war's end. If born in 1831, Leigh would indeed have been about 17 at the war's conclusion in 1848. What is clear is that by the time the Mexican War ended, Leigh had already crossed continents, left family behind, and stepped fully into the world that would define him, recalling that after his service he came to the Rocky Mountains, quote, to begin life as a free trapper and to learn peace among whites and Indians. Following his discharge at the close of the Mexican War, Richard Leigh turned decisively towards the mountains. According to Steve Roberts, he traveled from Rio Grande to the Salt Lake Valley, presumably trapping, and then moved north into what would become Idaho territory, eventually choosing the Snake River Valley as his base. The beaver boom had largely faded by 1840, but Leigh carved out new trapping lines through the Tetons and Upper Snake Country, becoming fluent in both Bannock and Shoshone, and over time, he became the first non-Native American man to settle permanently in the Upper Snake River Valley of Idaho. By the mid-1850s, Teton Valley magazine places him already trapping in Pierre's Hole, describing him as a, quote, solitary buckskin-clad Englishman with a Cockney accent, readily recognizable for his thick red hair and freckled, bearded face. Among the Shoshone, he was known as Inkapumba, meaning redhead. But what about the name Beaver Dick? Where did that come from? Take a guess. We aren't 100% sure. Historians are conflicted on whether it came from Brigham Young of all people, who was impressed with his trapping skills, or that he may have had prominent front teeth, like a beaver. Unfortunately, this information is lost to history, but from that point forward, he would be known as Beaver Dick Leigh. In the winter of 1862, while traveling near Bannock camps after a trip south, Leigh stopped at the encampment of a Bannock man known to settlers as Bannock John. Teton Valley magazine recounts that on a bitter cold winter night, he assisted the man's wife, sister of Chief Tarchie, in delivering a child, who was named Susan Sue Tadpole. The parents were grateful for his help and promised the girl to Leigh as a future wife, though given that he was 31 at the time, the promise appears to have been symbolic rather than practical. Instead, in 1863, he married a 16-year-old Eastern Shoshone woman from Chief Washaki's band, giving her the English name Jenny. Though no formal record of the ceremony survives, Roberts notes it was performed by a minister, and Leigh would later write with pride about Jenny's character and abilities. Together they built a homestead near the confluence of the Snake and Teton rivers. Over the next decade, 5 children were born: Dick Jr. 1864, Anne Jane 1866, John 1868, William 1870, and Elizabeth 1873. Leigh's diary reflected pride in his growing family, and especially in his eldest son. Their life was mobile and communal. When Leigh traveled on annual hunts or guiding trips, the entire family often accompanied him, living in their own lodge. By the early 1870s, Leigh's reputation as a guide had spread far beyond the Snake River. Beaver Dick Leigh guided the 1872 Hayden Expedition, which surveyed the Yellowstone region and helped lay the groundwork for the creation of Yellowstone National Park. Nathaniel P. Langford, later the park's first superintendent, praised him in striking terms. Quote, "There is not a stream, lake, or range in any direction from us for 100 miles with which he is not familiar. He has the entire mountain range in his mind's eye, like a map." Esther B. Allen records that members of the expedition described him as, quote, "perfectly familiar with all the accessible portion of the Rocky Mountains," adding, "We must depend upon his guidance in fording streams, crossing mountain passes, and avoiding collisions with unfriendly Indians." His family accompanied the survey party, and photographer William Henry Jackson captured the only known image of Jenny during that trip. This is the photo you are looking at now. In recognition of his service, the expedition named Leigh Lake for him and Jenny Lake for his wife, while Beaver Dick Lake was later renamed Stream Lake. By then, as Ken Hughes would later write, Beaver Dick was a man of influence in the Fire Hole and Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and west of the Tetons in Idaho. His knowledge of the Teton country was unmatched by any man, white or Indian. What he didn't know, his wife Jenny and her people did. In addition to trapping and guiding, he served at times as a liaison between native tribes and officials at the newly established Fort Hall Reservation, advising authorities on Indian movements on and off the reservation. Leigh constructed a ferry back in 1863-64 at Eagle Nest Ford on the Henry's Fork of the Snake River, a crossing that became known as the Beaver Dick Ferry, and notably allowed travelers to use it free of charge. Yet even here, questions linger. A diary entry from an unnamed traveler described the Beaver Dick, for whom the ferry was named, as a, quote, "craggy old mountaineer." A curious detail, since Richard Leigh would have only been about 32 at the time. That description raises a legitimate debate. Was this our Richard Beaver Dick Leigh, prematurely aged by hard mountain living, or was there another frontiersman known by the same nickname? Despite digging into it, the record offers little clarity. What do y'all think? I know I have some listeners from Idaho, and I'm genuinely curious about this. The winter of 1876 brought an end to the first chapter of Richard Leigh's frontier life. According to Steve Roberts, an Indian woman seeking food visited the Leigh cabin along the Henry's Fork and unknowingly carried smallpox into their one-room home. Within days, the disease spread through the family. The Teton Valley magazine describes the horror starkly. Quote, "Jenny and their 6 children contracted smallpox. His entire family died within 12 days. Dick, though seriously sickened himself, survived." Esther B. Allen provides the recorded dates. Jenny dying the 17th of December, 1876, followed by the children between the 24th of December and the 28th of December. Later accounts relate that, quote, assisted by trapping comrades, Dick buried his entire family in the cold frozen earth, and because the ground was frozen, they were laid under the cabin floor, after which Leigh burned the cabin and its contents to prevent the spread of disease. In the months that followed, he recorded the crushing weight of loneliness, writing simply, I am so lonesome no matter how tired I am. His diary, which in 1875 had been filled with rhythms of hay cutting, trading livestock, trapping partnerships, and visits from Bannock families, falls silent in the winter of 1876 and does not resume until January 1878, a gap that may reflect either loss of pages or the emotional toll of that devastating loss. For 2 years after the tragedy, Roberts notes that Leigh struggled to maintain his homestead and some sense of normal life. During the unrest of the 1878 Bannock War, he and his old friends, such as Bannock John, kept out of sight to keep their hair, as he put it. Then, in the spring of 1879, in one of the West's more unusual turns of fate, he married 16-year-old Susan Sue Tadpole, the same child whose birth he had assisted years earlier. He was nearly 3 times her age. Together, they had 3 children, Emma, William, and Rose. Leigh resumed his seasonal life, taking his new family to the Tetons each summer and guiding an impressive roster of explorers, officials, and wealthy Eastern sportsmen. Among those associated with his guiding work were, already mentioned, Nathaniel P. Langford, the first superintendent of Yellowstone National Park, photographer William Henry Jackson, naturalist Dr. Merriam, Owen Wister, Dr. Boyes Penrose of Philadelphia, and even Theodore Roosevelt, who visited his camp near Two Ocean Creek in 1891. Allen also notes his friendship with Purdy and Louis Vanderbilt, reflecting how widely known he had become among elite hunting circles. Dr. Mitchell, describing him later in life, wrote of a round-shouldered, long-bearded, big-nosed man with a clear light blue eye, 50-odd years in the Rockies, emphasizing that we must depend on his guidance through canyons and mountain country. Despite advancing age and declining health, Leigh remained deeply tied to the region. He proved up on his homestead along the lower Teton River, receiving patent to the land in 1895, and continued corresponding with many acquaintances and friends he had accumulated over decades in the high country. Richard Beaver Dick Leigh died on the 29th of March, 1899, at age 68. He was buried on a terrace overlooking his ranch near East Wilford, Idaho, above the Snake River country he had trapped, guided, and called home. In death, as in life, his story became part memory, part landscape. Leigh Lake bears his name. Jenny Lake honors his first wife. Sue Leigh later lost the remaining acreage of their homestead to taxes and was buried at the Episcopal Mission Cemetery at Fort Hall, unable, it is said, to rest beside her husband. The Jenny Leigh Pioneer Cemetery now marks the site of the 1876 tragedy, and Beaver Dick Park near Rexburg commemorates his frontier life. Yet the terrain itself changed dramatically in the 20th century. The catastrophic failure of the Teton Dam in 1976 scored parts of the valley and flooded the Jenny Leigh Cemetery site before restoration. Even so, Beaver Dick's grave remained undisturbed on its knoll above the river, a final vantage point over a landscape that, by the time of his passing, had already begun to fade from the wilderness he once knew. I hope y'all enjoyed this episode on Richard Beaver Dick Leigh. If you did, please give a thumbs up and maybe subscribe. And if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you get your podcasts, please leave a 5-star rating. All this really helps me grow and reach new listeners. If you haven't checked out Spotify or Apple Podcasts, give it a try. You'll find 2 different 8-part series, over 4 hours of audio for each, on both the life of the legendary lawman Bass Reeves and the jolly mountain man, Joe Meek. Join the membership family. For just $1, you'll get access to bonus episodes like the first stagecoach robbery in U.S. history. Thank you for all the support. And a special thank you to the membership family. Y'all are amazing. We'll see y'all next time. And remember, when in doubt, shoot straight, shoot fast. God bless.